Hey, it's me, the mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. Hey, check out my new tag team, baby, Monty and the Pharaoh.
Hey, Jimmy, don't forget to tell them about Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast.
Well, you know what, I would, but you already did it.
It's Monty and the Pharaoh.
The Monty and Pharaoh Show.
Monty and Pharaoh, bro.
Monty and the Pharaoh. The Monty and the Pharaoh.
You've got the future Hall of Famer, that rocker, Marty Jannetty, MJ in the house, and I'm sitting here with two more future Hall of Famers, Monty and the Pharaoh. We're doing that stuff and we gonna rock it.
Monty and the Pharaoh.
It's Monty and the Pharaoh.
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 And Monty and the Pharaoh. Oh, is it Monty and the Pharaoh?
Monty and the Pharaoh.
Monty and the Pharaoh.
Hey, cut music. When you want the best in professional wrestling, Long Island, there's only one place you're going to get it, right here.
Monty and the Pharaoh. Now, that's not just the coolest, and that's not just the best. That, my friends, is just incredible.
Monty and the Pharaoh. Duh.
Hey! Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare! And you're watching the #1 show on Long Island with Monty and the Pharaoh.
But here's the thing. He's telling a pedophile to stop doing what he's doing, and even though he fired him for that, he brought him back. That in itself is very suspicious.
All right, welcome back to Long Island's #1 pro wrestling broadcast, Monty and the Pharaoh, seen only here out of Indie Music TV. Well, let's introduce our special guest, Mr. Lee Cole. Lee, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Lee Cole, if I can briefly give a summary of why our guest is here today. Tom Cole, Lee's brother, worked as a ring boy for WWE, then of course known as WWF Titan Sports, and accused employees Terry Garvin and ring announcer Mel Phillips of misconduct. Cole stated in multiple interviews that he rejected the sexual advances of the Garvin, Terry Doyle, who was fired by the company following the Ring Boy scandal. In a 1999 WrestlingPerspective.com interview, Cole recalled Garvin offering him a WWE warehouse job when he was 19. He claimed that Garvin drove him to his home, where he claimed his wife and kids would be. Upon arrival, Garvin claimed to have forgotten that his family was in Florida. Cole alleged that Garvin played a pornographic video and offered to perform oral sex on him. Cole said he rejected Garvin's offer and spent the night sleeping in a van during a snowstorm. The next morning, Garvin dropped him off at the warehouse, and then former WWE announcer Mel Phillips Jr. informed him later that day that Garvin no longer wanted him to work at the warehouse. Garvin, who resigned from the WWF following multiple sexual misconduct accusations, died on August 17th, 1998 at age 61. Lee, I understand that this is a very small recap of the situation. Can you help us fill in some blanks, please?
Yes. When Tom was 16, he originally left the WWF. He was just a kid at that time. He left the WWF because Terry Garvin came on to him at that time. And then he was offered a job back by Mel Phillips. And, you know, one thing that we have to remember, when these kids started going around the WWF, they were 13, they were 14, they were 15. These were young kids. And what they did, it was like pretty much they groomed them, and they kept the ones that they thought were good-looking kids. They would just go through a herd of kids and pick and choose the ones that they want. And it was like they worked them up the ladder. It started off with Mel, then it went to Terry. And along the way, they were sexually harassed a lot of times by Pat Patterson.
How did it all come about that he was able to even work there? He
was in White Plains, New York, he went to a show in the White Plains area where, at that time, Arnold Skolin, it was his show. And Mel, he bumped into Mel there. And Mel was with some other kids, and then Mel started getting friendly and talking to him. And this is how he would do it. And then Tom told him he lived in Yonkers. And the next thing you know, like I think I gave you a picture of when Tom was 14 years old and he's wearing the WW with a Hulk Hogan cap and stuff. But that's when they started grooming him. And Tom at that time was very excited because he's a young kid. You know, they were using him to set up the ring crew. But that's what they did, though. They used wrestling to lure these kids in. And at that time, my mother was an alcoholic, and my father was working all the time, and he was never around. And that's what they preyed off. Now, if you look at this picture here, you see how young he is. I mean, this is what they, and so, it's like Vince McMahon would say that he never knew this was going on. Everybody knows that Vince McMahon has eyes everywhere in his buildings. And this was from WrestleMania, this picture right here. During the settlement negotiation, that's my ex-wife and my son with Ray Combs and Vince McMahon. They gave us backstage passes, front row seats to WrestleMania. That was from Linda McMahon. And they were treating us really good at that time, but once they seen that they couldn't get me on their side, they decided that they were going to do everything they could to get me out of the way.
Who did most of the, I hope I say this the right way, who did most of the recruiting itself with these young kids? Was it Mel?
Yes.
It was
Mel Phillips Mel was, I guess, the hunter. He was the hunter. He would go out and look for these kids.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example. Like Tom hung with a certain group of kids in Yonkers, and these kids were street kids, pretty rugged, tough kids, but all from broken families. And so what he would do, it was a lot like the Epstein thing, where he would take one girl and send that girl out to bring her friends back. Mel would do the same thing. He would say to Tom, well, why don't you bring some friends here? And then, that's pretty much how they would, go through these kids. But a lot of these kids were real smart, and they would say to Tom, this guy's creepy, dude. I'm out of here.
Okay.
And your brother, he didn't say that. Was it because he wanted to be a professional wrestler, or he was just why was he different than the others?
Because, back then he called himself Tommy 14 Karat Golden. That was his name. And he used to love announcing, pretending he was a ring announcer. His dream was always to be a ring announcer. And he was just living for that dream. And, you got to remember, at this time, this kid was literally homeless. He spent 3 months sleeping in his girlfriend's closet without the parents knowing. I mean, that was Tom.
Where were you staying at that time? You did say that the family was broken, so Tom was, sounds like Tom was floating, just trying to find an identity, and the company seemed to be giving him somewhat of an identity in his life. Where were you during this?
I was, at that time, I was in New York City. I was married.
Okay.
And Tom used to come always, he used to show up at my doorstep all the time.
Okay.
But I never knew what was going on with the wrestling.
He never shared with you what was happening?
Not in the beginning, no.
Okay.
He shared with me finally in 1992. At that time, I got divorced and I was living up in Utica to be close to my son. So he showed up, and that's what Tom used to always do. And he would stay a couple months with me. And so, I could see, I kept saying to him, why do you go to ECW shows in Philadelphia, but you don't do anything with the WWF anymore? And then he finally sat down and told me. Mm-hmm. And he showed me Phil Munchnick's article. So I called Phil Munchnick. And then that's when I started understanding everything that was going on. And then I started doing a lot of investigating, calling, I found a lot of kids. And just a lot of things, and it was like, wow, I couldn't believe that this company was actually doing this. And then at that point is when the threat of a lawsuit, a lawyer was brought on, and there was a lot of mistakes made because
Well, Lee, I want to set the table first, okay? So you had 6 major players involved in this scandal: your brother, Terry Garvin, Mel Phillips, Pat Patterson, Vince McMahon, and his wife, Linda McMahon.
Yes.
Tell us about each from your perspective and your brother's perspective, how you guys felt about those people individually.
Well, as for Mel Phillips, I felt like he was just a sleazy guy. He had no right to be around that business at all. Terry Garvin, pretty much the same way, because he was brought into that business by his friend Pat Patterson. And then Pat Patterson, I didn't really know what to think of Pat Patterson. I knew he was gay, and that didn't really mean anything to me. It was the sexual harassment that employees continuously faced under Pat Patterson. And then I met Vince McMahon for 2 days. And the first day I met Vince McMahon, I went into his office, we started talking. What they did is they split me and Tom up. Tom went with Linda, with Vince. And Vince pretty much took me to the side, and then we just kept talking. That night, they took us out for dinner. And I drove with Vince, and Tom drove with Linda. They played the game of splitting us up and seeing what they could do. They didn't know I was involved in this until the lawsuit was negotiated, until the settlement was negotiated. They purposely kept me out of my lawyer purposely kept me out of the negotiations. And we later found out that he was talking to Jerry McDevitt without telling us and coming to some type of conclusion with Jerry McDevitt. They would leave Tom in the room alone with Vince McMahon during negotiations, his own lawyer, which is unheard of. And then on top of that, when the lawsuit, when they settled, when Tom went back to the WWE, they had him signing a bunch of paperwork, and never once did they say to him, "Do you want your lawyer here?" The lawyer just literally disappeared out of the scene. And Tom was in the room with Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon at the time, and Jerry McDevitt. And here you got this street kid with 3 people like that.
How old is Tom at this point? Lee, how old is Tom at this point?
About 20 years old.
About 20 years old. I know you feel that,
yes.
I've heard you say, and I understand, that you feel that Vince knew all along. Do you feel Linda knew all along?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Being on that floor and seeing how that company operates and being within, there's a lot of wrestlers that never get inside on that floor with those people. Mm-hmm. For 2 days I was up there. Mm-hmm. And to see how they operate up there and how they do things, there's no way that Vince and Linda McMahon did not know what was going on in their company. You have to remember, Vince McMahon admitted to Phil Muchnick that he fired Mel Phillips because he knew Mel Phillips had a problem with the boys. And then a few months later, he hired him back, and he told him stop with the boys. But here's the thing. He's telling a pedophile to stop doing what he's doing. And even though he fired him for that, he brought him back. That in itself is very suspicious.
You're in your brother's life now. You're involved in this situation.
Yes.
What did he share with you? What did he tell you to kind of stay away? Did he tell you he still wanted to work there? Like, what was he telling you?
No, absolutely no. Him going back to work was a shock, because the day of the negotiations, when they went to the building, when they met, Vince McMahon came in on a Sunday morning and snuck into Manhattan and met with the lawyer. And at that time when they met, they basically they were arguing with Tom, and Tom's lawyer gave him a big figure, and Vince McMahon said, "If you back me in the corner, I'll fight you like an alley cat." And then Tom just jumped up and said, "Stop, I don't want," he looked at Vince and said, "I just want my job back." And at that point, Vince said, "Okay, I'll give you your job back." And he says, "I'll give you," so they decided to give him a couple of years back pay, and for the time that he lost with the company, and they brought him back. But, when they brought him back, there was they all of a sudden started changing everything with Tom. They signed a contract with Tom with no lawyer in the room, where they told Tom he had to go back to school and he had to pass school or they could fire him. So they added this new thing into the negotiations that was never there in the first place. They just did it on their own.
What sort of job was he given when he returned? He clearly wasn't a ring boy anymore.
No, well, he worked on the rings.
He still was working on the rings. Okay.
Well, ring crew.
Okay. All right.
But the thing is wrestlers can be pretty brutal. The mocking and all that stuff. And So Tom said, Tom went to Linda and told Linda, look, I'm really getting a lot of harassment from the fans and stuff. They were calling him all sorts of names. So he went through a lot at that point, and then he decided that he'd go to Linda, and then Linda says, how about if we put you back in school? And then Tom said, okay, I'll go back to school. But all of a sudden, and I have these contracts too, and I see them, they're unbelievable. So they say to him, if you can go back to school, they're telling a street kid that's been out of school since he's been 13 years old, that if you go back to school, get your high school diploma and go to college, we'll hire you back, we'll bring you back into the company. So Tom says, Tom didn't want to do this, but he was kind of pushed in the corner. And then at that moment, what they did is they had Tom sign this ridiculous contract that said, if you fail any of your classes or don't show up for your classes, we could fire you. And not only that, they were in constant contact with the school. His employer was in contact with the school. I have these letters from the professors and stuff having regular conversations with Linda McMahon. And this was all Linda McMahon at this point.
But so you don't, Lee, you don't think that's a case of they know he's a troubled teen or now a troubled young adult and they're trying to help him with his life, but they want to hold him accountable?
No. And the reason why, because none of this was negotiated without a lawyer. Everything that they did without a lawyer. Tom's lawyer, this Alan, I don't want to say his last name, should have been in the room, should have been going over these contracts. They kept putting contracts in front of Tom and kept having him sign all sorts of things. And Tom said to Linda, look, I'll sweep your floors here. I'll mop he goes, I just want to work. I don't want to go to school. I want to work. This is what I want to do. I'll do anything you said. And Linda goes, no, we can't put you in the building working. No, we can't do this. They wouldn't even put him in the warehouse. There was lots of places, as anybody that knows of WWE, there's lots of places you could work and be away from the fans. And Tom asked for that job. Everybody would say, well, they were trying to put him to school and help him. Okay, sure. But why did they sign these contracts, always sign all these contracts, knowing that Tom had a lawyer, knowing that they shouldn't have been doing it this way, and just negotiating everything with Tom? I mean, it was a sleeve, and they just wanted to get him out of the company legally.
Lee,
and they wanted Pat Patterson back.
Well, Lee, part of my problem that I'm having, and obviously you have a lawyer, Tom's got a lawyer. What about child labor, right? You said Tom was working for them at 13 years old, right?
Yes,
that's got to be illegal
exactly.
labor. So
it's a violation. What they were doing is they were taking kids across state lines for the purpose of for sex.
How are
which
they
is a
paying
violation
them?
of
How are they paying these kids when they were 13?
under the table, out of the
okay.
under the
All
table.
right, just want to make sure that's established here. Okay,
Yep.
very good.
Yes. So, and here's the thing: Vince McMahon admitted that these boys were working and helping set up the ring, but no one ever said to Vince McMahon, "Well, let me see your payroll. Why do you have 13, 14-year-old kids working for you?" And on top of that, they were taking these kids across state lines, which is totally illegal.
Lee, I got to ask you because it's burning at me. I have to ask you this: what as traumatic? It's obvious, especially by your recent statements after your brother passed. Unfortunately, it's obviously this was very traumatic to him. Why on earth did he go back? And how did you feel when he went back? Were you pissed off? Were you confused?
Yeah. Well, he came during negotiations. We had another lawyer. And that lawyer came back with, and this lawyer was a good lawyer, but he could not represent us because his son had some type of contracts with Hasbro Toys. So there was a conflict of interest. So he had to stay in the background. He couldn't even show his face. He came in the room right after negotiations, and he said to me, he goes, your brother just f***ed up. He just made a deal to go back to work. And then I was really mad at Tom, and I was saying, what the hell did you do? Then Tom came up to me and gave me a hug and and then he said to me, Lee, I just want to go back to work. I want my job back.
But he wanted to go back there, not go work anywhere. He wanted to go back there.
He wanted to work for the WWE because he loved it. And he was under the assumption that the men that gave him harassment were all gone. That was the assumption. He was not going to go back and have to face these men. You know what it was? He was living in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
You know, I love
Yeah.
my brother, but
Yes.
that's what he was.
Yeah.
And they
Understood.
used wrestling. They used wrestling as a tool. And one thing you got to understand: when I say they could have kept Tom there, and Tom would have been a great worker. After Tom left that company, he became a bodyguard for billionaires. He became a very successful man. He had almost $1 million house in Hopewell Junction. He had a very good job, making $100,000 a year, and he made something of his life. And they did not give him the opportunity to do what he did after he left there. And every time that something was coming up for Linda McMahon, like she was running for the Senate and stuff, their lawyer, who's the biggest sleazebag in the world, and I despise, and I wish he would sue me. His name is Jerry McDivitt. As a matter of fact, I'm daring him to. I'm calling your names, Jerry. I'm saying you're a dirtbag and a sleazebag. You are the reason he's as bad as the McMahons. So he's the house lawyer. This guy's a phenomenal lawyer from what I hear. He's just a sleazebag. And so what he did is every time something came up for Linda McMahon, like running for the Senate, he would contact Tom with an email, say, "Hello, Tom, how you doing?" And then what he did is he pretended he was Tom's friend. And now Tom has died. He's been dead for 10 days now. Do you think that Jerry McDivitt or the WWE ever released a statement saying we're sorry to hear about Tom dying or anything? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And Jerry McDivitt said, "This guy is my friend, and we talk about our kids and everything now." When he left the WWE, why the hell didn't they just leave him alone and never talk to him again? And why was their lawyer friending him? Because they wanted to keep in touch with him. I have emails showing that Linda McMahon contacting my brother just a couple years ago when a story was coming out, and she was afraid it was about to come out because she was up for nomination going into the Trump cabinet. So she's contacting my brother, saying, "How you doing?" You know, and then Jerry McDivitt would contact him. So it was like they would literally keep it in contact. You got billionaires contacting my brother. You know, just leave him alone. Let everything go its way. Everything's done. But they never let him walk away because they always knew that he was the one person that can destroy that company. And Tom never came out and just sat down, and he had many, many opportunities. You know, I did a story with the Washington Post. The day before the story was supposed to come out, they squashed the story. We did a story with NBC, and the week before, it was with Tom Brokaw. And the week the story was supposed to come out, Vince McMahon had a friend named Dick Ebersol that stopped the story. You know, and this is what they always done. You know, it's been a constant thing. They know how to stop stories.
Did he ever share with you just how deeply these things were bothering him, the shadow of what had happened all those years ago?
Well, he called me a couple. He called me in, I would say, October, and he was crying on the phone. And he told me, he said to me, a lot more happened to me than I ever said, and I never said what happened to me because it's part of being a man. Tom was a very macho guy. He was a weightlifter. He was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He was a martial artist, and he always he never wanted to go out there because he worked for very, very rich men. And he was afraid if the stories came out when he was working for these people, that he would lose his job.
So wait, Lee,
and
are you trying to say that the story of Tom being harassed is well beyond that, and there was more sexual abuse than he led on to be all those years ago?
Yes, absolutely.
As an outsider, I've heard this story for a very, very long time, and to be honest with you, in a lot of cases, I thought it was suspect, right? It just didn't make sense to me. The stories you heard, again, I've never been involved in such a situation like that, so I can't speak for anybody, but I'm just talking as an outsider. But now, before the commercial break, you mentioned the story's much deeper than originally told. What happened to your brother?
Well, you know, he took that to his grave. You know,
he didn't share. He didn't share with you. He did not share with you.
No, he was just crying. He was just crying so bad when he was telling me. he was just a very proud man. He had 3 beautiful daughters, and that was his life. He just, I think it was more of embarrassment. A lot of sexual abuse victims are ashamed and embarrassed because of what happened to them,
Sure.
and they don't want to say. And you got to remember, Tom was, he perceived himself as a certain type of individual. This was a man who was a bodyguard. So that'd be like Mr. T coming out and saying, "Oh, this happened to me and this happened to me." It just doesn't fit the job description.
I know it. I know it.
And
I know it's very new right now. I know that the emotions are still very raw. But were you angry at your brother doing this? He obviously had a beautiful family, as you've spoke of. Did you feel he was being selfish? Did you go through any sorts of anger issues? Are you still working that out?
I was upset with him until I found out about the brain tumor,
Okay.
because the brain tumor was in the lobe of his brain, and it was that's the area that makes you. It's part of your mood swings and everything. And then when you put all the depression from the other stuff on top of that, between the health illnesses and this the sexual abuse that he had to endure. Once I heard that, even the girls, from what I understand, were very, when they heard that, they understood better.
Sometimes I feel all alone in this world, and there's nothing left to do or prove. Hoping for change, it better come soon. Maybe I was born to lose. Holding up these walls. Holding up these walls. So